According to Helena Blavatsky's monumental work, The Secret Doctrine, Atlantis was not merely a philosophical allegory created by Plato, but a historical reality that existed as the home of humanity's fourth root race. This vast continent, she taught, occupied much of what is now the Atlantic Ocean, extending from the present-day Caribbean to the Mediterranean, and from the coast of Africa to the Americas. Blavatsky claimed to have received detailed information about Atlantis from the Mahatmas, or Masters of Wisdom, who preserved ancient records in their secret libraries. These teachings, she asserted, were based on the Book of Xian, an ancient text that chronicled the entire history of human evolution on Earth, including the rise and fall of the great civilizations that preceded our current fifth root race. The Atlantean civilization, according to Blavatsky, began approximately 1 million years ago and reached its peak around 850,000 years before our time. This timeline far exceeded Plato's account, which placed Atlantis only 9,000 years before his era. Blavatsky explained that Plato had received only fragments of the true history, transmitted through Egyptian priests who themselves possessed incomplete records. The Atlanteans, Blavatsky taught, were giants compared to modern humans, often reaching heights of 12 to 15 feet. They possessed physical capabilities that would seem superhuman today, including the ability to see simultaneously on both the physical and astral planes. This dual vision gave them powers that our current humanity has lost, allowing them to perceive and manipulate forces invisible to ordinary sight. Most significantly, Blavatsky emphasized that understanding Atlantis was crucial for comprehending both our past and our future. The lessons of Atlantean civilization, particularly its ultimate destruction due to moral corruption, served as warnings for our current fifth root race, which faces similar temptations and dangers as it develops its own mastery over natural forces. Chapter 2. The Atlantean Golden Age. During its Golden Age, which Blavatsky placed between 850,000 and 700,000 years ago, Atlantean civilization achieved a level of technological and spiritual development that surpassed even our modern capabilities. The Atlanteans had mastered what Blavatsky called the dynamic force, a subtle energy that could be harnessed for both creative and destructive purposes, similar to what we might today call psychic or electromagnetic energy. Blavatsky described Atlantean cities as marvels of crystal architecture, with massive structures that seemed to defy the laws of physics as we understand them. These buildings were not merely constructed, but grown, using the Atlanteans' knowledge of how to direct natural forces to create matter in desired forms. The crystal structures served both as architecture and as technological devices, capable of storing, amplifying, and transmitting the subtle energies that powered their civilization. The Atlanteans possessed aircraft that operated not through mechanical propulsion, but through the manipulation of gravitational and magnetic forces. These vehicles, according to Blavatsky, could travel vast distances instantaneously and even navigate between different dimensional planes. The technology was based on the pilot's ability to harmonize their consciousness with the natural forces of the planet and cosmos. Agriculture in Atlantis was similarly advanced, with crops grown through the direct application of life force rather than merely through soil cultivation. The Atlanteans could accelerate plant growth, enhance nutritional content, and create new species by working consciously with the evolutionary forces that govern all life. This knowledge allowed them to support massive populations without depleting natural resources. Most remarkably, Blavatsky taught that during this golden age, the Atlanteans maintained direct communication with the spiritual hierarchy that guides planetary evolution. They received instruction from beings she called the Lords of Flame, advanced souls who had completed their own evolution and remained connected to Earth to assist in humanity's development. Chapter 3. Atlantean Sciences and Technologies. Blavatsky revealed that Atlantean science was based on the understanding that all matter is ultimately condensed energy, and that consciousness could influence matter through the proper manipulation of these energies. This knowledge allowed them to achieve technological feats that would seem miraculous by today's standards, though Blavatsky insisted they were accomplished through natural law rather than supernatural intervention. The Atlanteans had developed what she termed sound technologies that utilized specific vibrations and tones to achieve various effects. They could shatter rocks, move massive stones, heal diseases, and even influence weather patterns through the precise application of sonic frequencies. These technologies were based on their understanding of how sound waves interact with the molecular structure of matter and the etheric forces that bind atoms together. Blavatsky described Atlantean healing methods that combined physical, energetic, and spiritual approaches. Atlantean physicians could diagnose illnesses by perceiving the patient's aura and energy field, then apply corrections through the manipulation of life force, the use of crystal technologies, and the application of specific color and sound frequencies. Mental and emotional disorders were treated by adjusting the patient's subtle energy patterns rather than through purely physical interventions. Perhaps most significantly, the Atlanteans had mastered genetic science, though their approach differed radically from modern methods. Rather than manipulating DNA through mechanical means, they worked directly with the life force that shapes physical forms. This knowledge allowed them to influence evolution consciously, creating new species and modifying existing ones through the application of directed will and understanding of evolutionary principles. Communication technology in Atlantis operated through what Blavatsky called thought transmission, a sophisticated form of telepathy that could be enhanced and directed through crystal devices. Messages could be sent across vast distances instantaneously, and records could be stored in crystals that preserved not just information, but the actual thought forms and emotions of their creators. Chapter 4. The Four Atlantean Epochs. Blavatsky divided Atlantean civilization into four distinct epochs, each characterized by different levels of spiritual and technological development. The first epoch, spanning roughly from 1 million to 850,000 years ago, was marked by the Atlanteans' gradual descent into physical matter and the development of individual consciousness. During this period, they maintained strong connections to spiritual realms while learning to manipulate physical forces. The second epoch, the true Golden Age lasting from 850,000 to 700,000 years ago, represented the peak of Atlantean civilization. During this time, spiritual wisdom and material mastery were perfectly balanced. The Atlanteans used their advanced capabilities in harmony with cosmic law, serving not just their own interests, but the evolution of all life on Earth. Their society was characterized by cooperation, wisdom, and reverence for the natural world. The third epoch, from 700,000 to 200,000 years ago, marked the beginning of decline, as individual ego consciousness began to overshadow spiritual awareness. While technological capabilities continued to advance, they were increasingly used for personal gain rather than collective benefit. Competition and conflict began to emerge as different Atlantean groups pursued their own interests rather than working for the common good. The fourth and final epoch, lasting from 200,000 to approximately 11,500 years ago, witnessed the complete corruption of Atlantean civilization. Advanced technologies were turned to destructive purposes. Psychic powers were used for manipulation and control, and the connection to spiritual guidance was largely severed. This period culminated in the conflicts and natural catastrophes that ultimately destroyed the continent. Blavatsky taught that each epoch's transition was marked by natural disasters that served as both consequence and catalyst for the civilization's moral development. The Earth itself, she claimed, responds to the consciousness of its inhabitants, and the increasing materialism and selfishness of later Atlantean periods created instabilities that eventually led to the continent's destruction. Chapter 5. The Corruption of Power. According to Blavatsky's teachings, the downfall of Atlantis began when its inhabitants started using their advanced knowledge and psychic powers for personal gain rather than collective evolution. The same abilities that had created their Golden Age civilization, manipulation of subtle forces, telepathic communication, and mastery over matter, became tools of oppression and exploitation in the hands of those who had lost their spiritual orientation. Blavatsky described how certain Atlantean groups developed what she called black magic, the use of psychic powers and natural forces for selfish purposes. These practitioners could control other people's minds, manipulate their emotions, and even drain their life force to enhance their own power and longevity. They established secret societies that worked to concentrate power and knowledge among themselves while keeping the general population in ignorance and servitude. The corruption extended to Atlantean science and technology, which began to be used for warfare and domination rather than healing and construction. Blavatsky wrote about terrible weapons that could destroy entire cities through the misdirection of natural forces, and about experiments that violated the laws of nature by attempting to create artificial life forms without divine guidance. Perhaps most significantly, the later Atlanteans began to worship material power rather than spiritual truth. Their temples, which had once been centers of wisdom and healing, became places where dark rituals were performed to gain greater control over natural forces. The priesthood, originally composed of the wisest and most spiritually developed individuals, became corrupted by the desire for temporal power. Blavatsky taught that this corruption was not inevitable, but represented choices made by individuals who prioritized immediate gratification over long-term spiritual development. The same evolutionary forces that had elevated Atlantean civilization contained within them the potential for its destruction, depending on how they were used by conscious beings with free will. Chapter 6. The Great War of Atlantis. In her most dramatic revelations about Atlantis, Blavatsky described a great war that consumed the continent during its final period. This conflict was not merely a political or territorial dispute, but a fundamental clash between those who maintained some connection to spiritual principles and those who had completely embraced materialism and personal power. The war was fought using technologies that staggers the imagination, weapons that could level mountains, devices that manipulated weather patterns as instruments of destruction, and psychic attacks that could devastate populations without leaving physical traces. Blavatsky wrote that the Atlanteans' mastery over the elements allowed them to use fire, water, earth, and air as weapons of unprecedented destructive capability. According to Blavatsky's account, the conflict lasted for centuries and gradually consumed the entire continent. Cities were destroyed and rebuilt multiple times, and vast areas of land were rendered uninhabitable by the misuse of natural forces. The war's intensity grew as each side developed ever more destructive capabilities, leading to an escalating cycle of violence and retaliation. Most disturbing in Blavatsky's account was her description of experiments with what she called artificial elementals, artificial life forms created through the manipulation of astral matter. These beings, created to serve as soldiers and servants, eventually broke free from their creator's control and added their own chaotic influence to the destruction. The Great War represented not just physical conflict, but the ultimate consequence of spiritual corruption, Blavatsky taught that when a civilization loses its connection to higher principles and begins using sacred knowledge for destructive purposes, it inevitably destroys itself. The Atlantean War served as a cosmic lesson about the responsibility that comes with advanced knowledge and power. The war's conclusion came not through victory by either side, but through natural catastrophes that made continued conflict impossible, leading directly to the final destruction of the continent itself. Chapter 7, The Final Catastrophe. Blavatsky taught that the ultimate destruction of Atlantis occurred approximately 11,500 years ago through a series of catastrophic events that combined natural disasters with the consequences of the Atlanteans' misuse of their technological and psychic powers. The final catastrophe was not a single event, but a culmination of processes that had been building for thousands of years. According to the Secret Doctrine, the Atlanteans' experiments with natural forces had created instabilities in the Earth's crust and magnetic field that made catastrophic earthquakes and volcanic eruptions increasingly likely. Their manipulation of what Blavatsky called fohat, the cosmic electricity that binds matter together, had weakened the very foundation of their continent. The immediate trigger for the final destruction came from Atlantean attempts to harness the planet's core energy for their war efforts. These experiments, Blavatsky claimed, created a chain reaction that destabilized the tectonic structure underlying their continent. Massive earthquakes began occurring with increasing frequency, followed by volcanic eruptions that darkened the skies and poisoned the atmosphere. The most dramatic phase of the destruction involved what Blavatsky described as a great wave, a tsunami of unprecedented proportions that swept across the continent multiple times as the landmass broke apart and sank beneath the ocean. She taught that this was not merely a natural disaster, but a conscious response by the Earth itself to cleanse away a civilization that had become a threat to planetary evolution. Blavatsky emphasized that the destruction served a necessary evolutionary purpose. The Earth, as a living entity, could not allow the corrupted Atlantean civilization to continue indefinitely without risking damage to the entire planetary system. The catastrophe represented a form of cosmic surgery, removing diseased elements to preserve the health of the whole. The final sinking occurred in stages over several thousand years, with the last remnants of Atlantean land disappearing beneath the waves around 9500 BCE, close to the date mentioned in Plato's account. Chapter 8. Survivors and scattered wisdom. Despite the complete destruction of their continent, Blavatsky taught that significant numbers of Atlanteans survived the catastrophe by migrating to other lands before the final cataclysm. These survivors, she claimed, became the founders of many ancient civilizations and were responsible for transmitting fragments of Atlantean knowledge to the emerging Fifth Root race. According to Blavatsky's teachings, groups of Atlanteans had established colonies in various parts of the world during the height of their civilization. When the destruction began, these outlying settlements became refuges for those who escaped the sinking continent. The survivors carried with them not only Atlantean knowledge, but also the genetic and cultural characteristics that would influence human development for millennia. Blavatsky identified several ancient civilizations as being directly influenced by Atlantean survivors. The builders of the Egyptian pyramids, she claimed, were descendants of Atlantean colonists who retained knowledge of advanced construction techniques and geometric principles. Similarly, the mysterious megalithic structures found throughout Europe and the Americas were attributed to Atlantean influence. The survivors also preserved fragments of Atlantean spiritual knowledge, though much of it became corrupted or misunderstood over time. Blavatsky taught that many ancient mystery schools and esoteric traditions trace their origins to teachings originally developed in Atlantis, though the knowledge had been adapted and modified to suit the consciousness of later peoples. Perhaps most significantly, Blavatsky claimed that some of the most advanced Atlantean adepts, those who had maintained their spiritual orientation despite their civilization's corruption, deliberately incarnated among various ancient peoples to guide their development and prevent them from repeating Atlantis's mistakes. These beings served as the hidden teachers and inspirers of human civilization, working to gradually reintroduce advanced knowledge as humanity became ready to handle it responsibly. Chapter 9. Lessons for Modern Humanity. Blavatsky emphasized that the story of Atlantis was not merely historical information, but a crucial warning for our current fifth root race civilization. She taught that humanity in her time was beginning to develop capabilities similar to those possessed by the Atlanteans, and faced similar choices about how to use advanced knowledge and power. The parallels between late Atlantean civilization and modern society were, according to Blavatsky, particularly striking in the areas of materialism, technological development, and the pursuit of power. She warned that if humanity continued to prioritize material advancement over spiritual development, it could face a similar fate to that which befell Atlantis. Blavatsky specifically warned about the dangers of developing advanced technologies without corresponding moral development. The Atlanteans' mastery over natural forces had outpaced their wisdom and compassion, leading them to use their capabilities for destructive rather than constructive purposes. Modern humanity, she suggested, was approaching a similar crossroads where its technological capabilities could either serve evolution or destroy civilization. The lesson of Atlantean black magic was particularly relevant, according to Blavatsky, as modern humans began to explore psychic phenomena and mental influence. She taught that the same psychic powers that could be used for healing and enlightenment could easily become tools of manipulation and control if employed by those lacking proper spiritual development. Perhaps most importantly, Blavatsky taught that understanding Atlantis could help modern humanity make better choices about its future development. By learning from Atlantean mistakes, our current civilization could avoid repeating the patterns that led to destruction, and instead chart a course toward sustainable spiritual and material progress. She emphasized that the choice between evolution and destruction remained open, and that individual decisions about how to use knowledge and power would ultimately determine whether our civilization would transcend Atlantean limitations or repeat Atlantean failures. Chapter 10. The Atlantean Legacy and Future Evolution. In Blavatsky's teachings, the destruction of Atlantis marked not an ending, but a transformation, a necessary stage in the evolution of human consciousness that cleared the way for our current fifth root race to develop its distinctive characteristics. The lessons learned from Atlantean experience, both positive and negative, became part of the collective human inheritance that guides our species' ongoing development. Blavatsky taught that the advanced knowledge possessed by the Atlanteans was not permanently lost, but remained encoded in what she called the Akashic records, the cosmic memory that preserves all events and experiences. This knowledge would gradually become available to humanity again as our current race developed the wisdom and moral qualities necessary to use it responsibly. The emergence of the coming sixth root race, according to Blavatsky, would represent a conscious return to many Atlantean capabilities, but with the crucial difference of spiritual maturity that the late Atlanteans had lacked. The new race would possess psychic powers, mastery over natural forces, and advanced technologies, but these would be employed in service of universal rather than selfish purposes. Blavatsky predicted that certain locations on Earth still contained dormant Atlantean technologies and knowledge that would be rediscovered when humanity was ready. These revelations would come not through archaeological discovery alone, but through the awakening of genetic and soul memories carried by individuals who had incarnated during both Atlantean and modern times. The ultimate purpose of studying Atlantean history, according to Blavatsky, was to accelerate human evolution by learning from past mistakes and preparing for future responsibilities. Understanding how advanced civilizations could fall through moral corruption would help modern humanity make wiser choices as it developed its own mastery over natural and psychic forces. Blavatsky concluded that Atlantis represented both a warning and a promise. A warning about the dangers of spiritual complacency and material obsession, and a promise that human consciousness could eventually transcend all limitations through the proper balance of wisdom, power, and compassion. The fall of Atlantis thus became, in her teaching, not just ancient history, but a living guide for humanity's future evolution.